Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Q&A this week. In this week, post-election, where this world is a little bit, we're still all over the place emotionally, and people are on their highs, people are on their lows, and we are coming to you, hopefully helping us find that firm foundation that we find in the Word of God and in His presence, and that we can approach things with a cool-headedness. Right?
I like that phraseology, Steve.
Yeah, you like that? You like that? But we're excited that you're here joining us. And over the last several weeks, we have been doing a sermon series that is touching on these on this political season that we find ourselves in. And obviously, this week, as we led into actual election day, we're hoping that people found themselves grounded in the Word.
Yes.
That they understood their identity is not as an American, their identity is not as a Republican or a Democrat, but their identity belongs in Jesus Christ.
In Christ, absolutely.
But with that, we know that you guys have questions that you've been submitting. In fact, we encourage all of your questions every single week, not just about the political stuff that we find ourselves in, but every Sunday we encourage you to be listening with a critical ear. And if you hear something that you need clarification on, or you have just a question, we encourage you submit those questions on our website. That's my3c.org. That's the best place for you to reach us, and you can find the link to that and all of our social medias and everywhere that you can find us. But Dave, we'll just start with, how are you feel? Like, are you able to just take a deep breath now? Like, what is your, now that we are just post all of this, right?
Yeah.
Where do you find yourself? Because I know where I'm at. For me, it's, I'm glad I'm not getting 15, 20 texts a day from both sides of the aisle, right? My phone was blowing up.
And even though I do stop to everyone, it's like, I guess they just sell my number to a bunch of people because they keep coming. That's for sure. I'm glad that's over with. I'm glad we're not being bombarded with messages from all over the place anymore. And I think that by itself probably will help us as a culture settle a little bit when there's not that constant stream of stuff going on. And it'll give our souls, our minds a little chance to maybe settle, which normally happens. Look, politics matter because it impacts all of our lives. So we're not saying it doesn't matter. But what we are saying as a Christian is it doesn't matter nearly as much as something else. See it in perspective. Be grounded in the realities of God and His kingdom and His work in the world. And if we're grounded there, well, then the other things can be like, well, that's good, or I wish it had been that way. But our equilibrium is not impacted by what happens in the world of politics. So I'm hoping that everybody can take a breath, things can settle down, and we can maybe move forward together as a culture a little bit better as we kind of move into the post-election season.
Yeah, and that we can come and cohesively work together, too, as a church, because we're not naive to think that everyone in Connections or everyone that is associated with us all votes the same way. There are plenty of people who voted for Vice President Harris, and there are plenty of people that voted for Donald Trump. And for us to have a place where we can continue the dialogue and have respect doing that is really important to us. So if anybody, if you know our hearts here at Connections, that's who we are, regardless of politics or whatever divisive topic that we're going to be talking about. The ultimate goal is to say, how do we open the Word of God? How do we find God's heart for humanity? And that includes every one of us.
Every single one of us.
Yeah.
Well said.
Good. All right. Well, there are some questions that came in that we want to address. We love having your questions, and we love sitting here and talking about it, and hopefully giving you a little bit of insight. And like I said, if there are questions that come up, even from what you hear today, we would love for you to ask those. So let's jump into this first question.
Let's do it.
The first question says, what are the limitations on churches and politics? Great question. And are there any limits on how many sermons can touch on politics? And I actually love the heart behind this because, and I think that there are so many churches, one, that are afraid to even address something political in nature. But there's also maybe a misunderstanding of when people hear this separation of church and state. Mm-hmm. And so as we answer this, hopefully we can gain a little bit of understanding on really our nature of as a church of, are we unafraid to tackle some of these things?
Yeah.
And also, what is our legal responsibility or maybe limitations legally that there's an appearance of?
Yeah. And both are such relevant topics that speak directly to the question. I only chuckle because it's like, are there limits to how many sermons that can touch on politics? And I'm like, was 3 too many?
Well, I can tell you out of 52 weeks a year, if it was 52 weeks of political nature, there might be a limit.
There is, because at that point, the church has just become political. And the church can and should speak to matters of politics. We'll get into that a little bit today anyway. But the church is not inherently a political organization. It's a spiritual organization that is to spread throughout the whole earth, every culture, and help influence people for God, for their good, right? So whenever you have a church that is routinely bringing up political matters, I always question, like, what really matters most to you? There was a group of people in Jesus' day. They were called the Herodians. They show up a couple of times in the Gospels, stories of the life of Jesus. And what's interesting about the Herodians is they were Jews. But they were Jews that believed that you should capitalize on the politics of things in order to make your life as a Jew better and more comfortable. So what they really did in effect was they said, we're going to create a better life by trying to be involved in and exploiting the political process. Now, it was Rome, so it was somewhat limited because there was an emperor, right? And Jesus warned us about the leaven or influence of the Herodians. It's one of the influences he warned us against. And there's such a seductive power that politics can have, that if we could have political influence, we'll usher in a better age, a better time, a better environment. And the reason that's seductive is because it's only marginally true, and it also diverts our energies from what is substantially and eternally true, which is spreading the gospel and doing the work of King Jesus is going to have a far greater impact on our culture than political activism may be. So, yeah, I don't think as a church we should be political activists, but we should be utterly unafraid to speak the mind of God when God has actually revealed his mind on matters that are part of political discussions. Absolutely. So, what are the limitations? Let's address one of the things that you brought up, Steve, because it's so relevant, and that is governmental restrictions. Does our government restrict political involvement by churches? And the answer to that question is kind of. And the reason I say kind of is this. The government cannot, at this point, go to a church and go, you cannot say this. You cannot teach that. They don't do that. They don't have the authority to be able to do that. What they do have the authority to do is to revoke tax exempt status. So they could punish you financially. Now, I looked up the IRS policy on any nonprofit, because this applies to more than churches. It's just churches are lumped into a nonprofit category, right? And here's what it says according to the IRS website. The law prohibits political campaign activity by charities and churches by defining a 501(c), technical IRS designation, charitable organization, as one which, quote, does not participate in or intervene in, including the publishing and distributing of statements, any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for public office. Typical government wordy stuff. You can't campaign for or against a particular politician. That's what it says. If you do that, tax exemption revoked, you're going to start paying taxes, right? As an organization. It has been ruled that there's actually incredibly wide latitude here. And if you watch the news much at all, you'll see politician X is holding a rally at Church Z down the road, and all the people are there, and it's like a campaign rally, but it's in a church, and there's the pastoral staff and the choir singing, or whatever the case may be.
Well, and I think we saw that this election season,
we
right?
Totally did.
I remember one time seeing there was a video of Vice President Harris at a church, and they gave her opportunity to speak, and there was a platform. So how do you see that not violating or the latitude being stretched?
Here is the legal latitude that is granted. If what you're doing is considered voter education, you're free to do it. And what that appears to mean is anything short of a church going, you must vote for X, or you must vote against Y. Anything short of full-on endorsement is just considered voter education, and you can say whatever you want to say. So you have churches on both sides of the political aisle that often hold what sure looks like a campaign rally, but because they don't have an official endorsement, it technically doesn't violate the guidelines, and there's no revocation, right, of tax exempt status. So there is the capacity to punish a church like any other charity by going, you're not tax exempt anymore because you campaign for a political candidate. So that's the legal thing. But the government cannot say, you can't teach this, say this, whatever the case may happen to be. So that's the legal ramifications. But there's a social pressure that is sometimes enjoined by political powers as well as people in culture to attempt to get the church to not speak on political matters. And you mentioned the first one, separation of church and state. And what I have heard on a number of occasions is that if you're going to take your beliefs and you're going to try to champion them in the political arena for this candidate, this policy, this law, because your religion tells you to, that you're violating the constitutional mandate that the church and the state be separated. So be quiet. Religious people can't speak to these issues. Well, a couple of matters are really important for everybody to understand. One is the separation of church and state is not in the Constitution. It's not there. It's actually found in what's usually called the Federalist Papers, which were writings by the people that put the Constitution together. They explain their mindset behind things they put in the Constitution. That's what it largely is. And Thomas Jefferson is credited as being the first one to kind of make this statement. And what is intended by the separation of church and state is kind of twofold. One, the government cannot interfere with religious activity. So government, keep your nose out of what the church does. You can't regulate. It's not your business. The second thing that the framers had in mind was that the government would not establish an official religion. They'd been through that, and they didn't want that to be a part of this country they were founding. So consequently, the government could not say, here's the official religion. We're going to kind of marry the church and the state, and this is what we either expect or the basis upon which that we're going to govern.
Which at the time was very unique.
Totally unique. World. Because remember, the King of England and the church were like, I mean, they worked together in governing what was done. They said, no, we don't want to do that. So don't allow separation of church and state to be something that makes you think that there is a constitutional restriction on you voicing your values and your beliefs. Everyone involved in politics, Steve, is voicing their values and their beliefs. And so that's what our framers intended our country to be. You value this, you believe that, you speak your mind. You value something different, believe that, you speak your mind. Put it into the marketplace of ideas, and then when it's time to elect and do things, we'll all make up our own mind and we'll make a choice. So that's one way that there's kind of a social silencing going on, and that's been around for decades. The second way is newer, and this comes under the rubric of hate speech. Because what has become the dominant social idea, and legislation is beginning to be passed this direction, is that hate speech does not come under the umbrella of free speech and therefore can be censured or punished. It's illegal. It's wrong. You can't engage in that kind of speech. Okay. I don't know anybody for hate. So it's like, that's an easy one to kind of take, except what gets labeled as hate speech. Because what gets labeled as hate speech are ideas, beliefs, and values that are contrary to the ideas, beliefs, and values held by certain social power brokers or governmental leaders. So what we've begun hearing is, if the church speaks on matters of human sexuality, if the church speaks on matters of gender, if the church speaks on matters like even immigration issues, if the church speaks on matters like under the umbrella of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that if your belief or what you say is contrary to what is held by some, you're just being hateful. So you need to stop talking, because that's hate speech.
Well, and I think it's very clear that we point out that there is already a legal description of what is considered hate speech. Like, hate speech does exist in the legal context. It's what's trying to be implied as.
Absolutely. And unfortunately also, the things that I mentioned are being, in various places in our country, included in the language of the local laws that are being passed. So none of us really want to be involved in hate speech. But what is true is what one person considers to be true, healthy, valuable, and loving, another person can disagree with and go, I think you're just being hateful. And so that thorny issue, and it's a thorny issue, has developed, and it's used by some in order to say you must be silent on what you think in these areas. And these areas are having policies and laws passed regarding them. So I would say that as long as as Jesus told us, speak the truth in love. Now, if you're being obnoxious, combative, demeaning in the way you present your idea, if you're a Christian, it's like, knock it off. You dishonor God. That doesn't represent Jesus at all. But if the right spirit, the spirit of love and concern for people, your ideas that you garner from the teachings of Jesus are at odds with the prevailing social mores, you should not hesitate to speak it. It's actually not being hateful. It's being loving. Just make sure you're informed, speaking with the right attitude, and are able to dialogue civilly about it. So I would say, are there limitations to church and politics? There's the legal part we talked about, and then there's the social pressure that is sometimes applied by some that is just part of the environment that the church attempts to speak to issues in. The Bible has a lot to say about matters that today are under the umbrella of political ideology. When I was young, I heard this phrase a lot. So this was a long time ago, Steve. I was young. But it was, you can't legislate morality. And the reason I find that odd is because every law is a moral statement. Every law is going, you should not do this and you should do that. You can do this, you cannot do that. Every law has a morality attached to it of what you can and cannot do. Laws are thou shalt and thou shalt not. That's in essence what they are. And so because there's an inherent moral component to all politics and the Bible speaks to human morality, we're going to get involved, or we're going to speak the mind of God relevantly to matters that are considered politically. And as long as we do it with the right spirit, because that is so critical, and that we love and respect the people we're talking to, we shouldn't be afraid or think that we don't have the right to say what we believe truly represents the way and will of God for people.
Yeah. Which is going to lead us really good into our next question, because I honestly believe that what you said is very true. The heart nature of how we approach everything is so critical. Not always received or understood that is the perspective, right?
Yes.
That we're coming from, which immediately labels you as certain things.
It does.
So the next question you have is, when you try to influence culture by voting for those who hold Christian values and will pass Christian laws and policies, are you a Christian nationalist?
Ooh.
Are you forcing your religion on others?
Yeah.
Now, Christian nationalist has become one of those key terms that is starting to appropriate other labels to it, right?
Yeah.
If you're a Christian nationalist, you're also a racist, you're also a misogynist, you're also et cetera, right?
Yeah.
Like that term, just like the term evangelical, has been used to attack and to describe and lump multiple people together. So as we look at the heart of this question, like, how do we address this?
Yeah, that's a good one. Great question. So relevant. And everything you said is spot on. It's so much easier, requires way less work and thought to label someone as something that is considered negative so you can dismiss them without conversation. And everybody that I know, that's not true. I know many people on both sides of the political aisle. I know many people on both sides of the religious aisle who simply use labeling to go and have to pay attention to you. That's really unfortunate. We've lost the capacity to have a respectful dialogue where we disagree over ideas, values, beliefs, policies, but can share why we believe what we believe in a fair way so that we can either persuade or be persuaded. And it's sad because civilization loses its civility when we can't do that anymore. which means civilization is literally being eroded because we label and dismiss rather than respectfully dialogue and give reasons why we think a certain way, and we're all persuadable and can also persuade because both are critical, right? So what is Christian nationalism? Because you are right, it's a term that is being used and morphing while it's being used to include a bunch of other things as well. Okay, how to approach it? Okay, let me start with this. When you try to influence by voting, supporting, whatever, a certain candidate, a certain policy, a certain law, whatever, when you try to influence things to move that direction based off of your Christian ideas, values, and beliefs, that does not make you a Christian nationalist any more than an atheist who supports a candidate, a policy, a law that would champion atheistic ideas becomes an atheist nationalist, trying to force your views on everybody. Or Jewish person, or Muslim person, or agnostic person, or fill in the blank. Every single one of us, I think, when we're trying to influence by voting or supporting someone or something, it all comes from our worldview and our values. This is how our country was set up to be a democratic republic. That's what we're set up to be, a democratic republic. We have a representative form of government where, as people exchange ideas, we can install certain people who will establish certain policies or laws that are binding on everybody. I mean, when it becomes the law, it's binding on everybody. If I look at a law that I go, that doesn't reflect Christian values, that reflects whatever, atheist, godless values. I'm being forced to obey that law, but I look at it and I go, this is the culture in which we live. This is the system of government we have. And when someone with a certain set of ideas and beliefs is able to get enough people together that they pass laws, those laws are forced on all of us. It's the system. Those laws can be changed because people govern at the will of the governed, of the citizens. We can replace them and, in effect, change laws and policies if we want. That's how it's all set up. So it's not like Christians uniquely can't have a voice because they're forcing their religion on people. If you want to look at it through that paradigm, everybody who champions anybody is trying to force their beliefs on everybody. It's how things are set up in a democratic republic. So what is Christian nationalism? Technically, Christian nationalism is the belief that Christianity should hold a special place in the governance of America. Christian nationalism doesn't mean that people should be forced to embrace Christianity. Christian nationalism doesn't mean that you can't speak out against Christianity. Christian nationalism doesn't believe that you don't have the right to practice whatever religion you want or believe whatever you want to believe. But rather, and I'm just trying to define it. Christian nationalism says that our country was founded to be a Christian nation, and therefore Christian beliefs and values should have a special place in the way we are governed, And the Christian faith should be the major factor in driving policies that impact social structures. That technically is what Christian nationalism actually is.
Which sounds like a good thing.
It sounds like a good thing. But we have to ask ourselves a question and actually answer it honestly, because in the circles I run in, I hear it all the time. America was founded to be a Christian country. Is that true? And the answer is nope. And I know that is like, turn off the YouTube channel, right? It was not founded to be a Christian country. Just let me walk through a couple of things. America was founded upon the principle of freedom and limited government. It was founded so that people could enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? That these were unalienable rights because God gave them to every human being. And the government's role was to protect from, I'm super synopsis, protect from external threat. The government's role was to ensure peace and tranquility within, and to establish policies, laws necessary so everybody could flourish, that we all had equal opportunity to pursue what we wanted to pursue, do what we wanted to do, believe what we wanted to believe without governmental interference. When our founding documents were set up, it was made clear that the government could not limit our freedom of speech. It made it very clear that the government could not force a particular religion on anyone. Well, no, wait a minute. If it was designed to be a Christian nation, it would have been, and Christianity is the religion of this new democratic republic. But they made sure to go, there isn't a religion, Christianity included, that is the official religion of the United States of America. From that standpoint, it was set up to be secular. That word can be used in several ways. We usually react against the connotation of the word. What it means is it was set up without a particular faith frame of mind that was required by anybody. That's all that means from that standpoint. So was America founded to be a Christian nation? No, it was not. Here's what's fascinating, Steve. But the very notion of not founded to be a particular religious nation or to force a particular religious view grows from the Bible itself. In fact, it's the values, principles, and beliefs that are found in the Bible that had the greatest impact on all of our founding documents by far. There were two University of Houston professors, not like, Christian, let's find something. And they went through all of the founding documents of our country to discern, based on quotes and citations. In other words, we think this because so-and-so said this or whatever. What had the most influence on the way our government was formed? And they determined that 94% of the citations were either direct quotes from the Bible or from people explaining what the Bible meant. So it was Christian values. Why was our Constitution, why were we guaranteed as citizens life, freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Take responsibility for your life and do what you want with it, because those are Christian values. So the tension is this. Our country was crafted to operate on values that rest firmly on the Christian faith. while at the same time saying, because we respect every human being, we don't force any religion on anybody, because that's what Christianity says. You don't force yourself on anybody. You share, you grant opportunity, you persuade, but we believe in the right of every human being, as a Christian, to make their own decision. And by the way, live with the consequences of it, because welcome to being human. So forcing, no way, but sharing, absolutely. So we were not designed to be a Christian nation. It would have been so easy to put that in the Constitution, but we were built on Christian values. And I would suggest, I'm now shifting into Dave's opinion, I would suggest that the way our system of governance is set up, it works better when Christian values undergird it. And as Christian values erode, it becomes much more thorny and problematic. I think that's a reality. But being forced, absolutely not, in no way. The proper way to say it, I think, is not America was founded to be a Christian nation, but rather America was founded as a Christianized nation, meaning the values of Christ were incredibly influential in the way the fabric of society happened. The work of the church is to influence societal fabric by introducing people to Jesus, hopefully them believing, committing their life to Jesus, embracing the ways of Jesus, because we believe that enhances the social framework exponentially better than any other ideal. But we do it through persuasion and not force. I hope culture becomes more Christianized. The influence of Jesus has a greater sway on a greater number of citizens, but forcing never happens. So we were not set up to be a Christian nation. We were set up to be a nation where individuals could make their choice based off the freedom of speech to persuade. And all of those principles come right out of the Bible. So I think that's the tension.
Yeah. And that's good. That's a good distinction and clarification, because I think there are labels that get attached real quick. As soon as you say, I am a Christian, well, then you must be Christian nationalist.
Yes.
And I think it's very clear we would very much reject that label and that idea. We may be Christian, and we may desire and hope for a government that is chasing after the values of Jesus Christ.
Yes.
But those things are not labeled together.
They're not. And they're not mandated by the Constitution. And the beauty of the way it's set up is, let's all influence each other. Let's all share ideas and why, and then we'll make decisions. They can always be changed later, but we'll make decisions and we'll find a way to come together and work together as a culture. Those are Christian ideals. And those Christian ideals say, don't force your Christianity or anything on anybody.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a very interesting area. But if we want to be precise, I think that's the way we need to see it.
Yeah. Well, and speaking collectively as a whole, as Americans, as America, the nation, leads us into our last question, which is great, is how does America, how do we heal after such a divided and hateful political campaign? And I think it's no question, it's very obvious that there are some of these words: divided, hateful. These are correct adjectives that we can apply to the political season that we've just witnessed, maybe even over the past 10 years or longer. It seems like it feels like it's becoming more divisive and more polarizing. How do we heal?
Yeah, I love this question. I love this question because it's accurately assessing the environment we're in and going, how do we bring something good out of this? How can we make it better? That's a great, truly Christian perspective. I've been around long enough now to see a bunch of election cycles, right? And in my lifetime, which is the only thing I can attest to, never seen it this volatile to where the labeling, name calling, demonizing, not only a candidate, but everybody that supports that candidate. It's doomsday. It's all or nothing. If you love America, you have to vote for this person. It's just ratcheted up, right? And it's like extreme. No wonder there's such angst. And that's so tragic. You know, it's like fear does motivate. Mm-hmm. And people are using it to increasing degrees to motivate. But fear also shuts down rational thinking. Fear also keeps us from actually listening. In other words, all the things that we need to function together as a civilized society are diminished greatly when fear is the dominant thing. So I kind of abhor the practice. And because of the label, we learn to hate the people that are associated with a particular ideology or party or whatever. So tragic. So unlike Christ. So what can we do? Oh, great question. Here are some things that come to mind. Step number one, I would say, how about some forgiveness? I think it's fair to say that in this latest political season, a lot of people said a lot of really over-the-top things that when they settle down, they maybe didn't mean quite that passionately. We get caught up in the moment. We say things that are over the top, especially if we feel desperate or vulnerable or insecure. And what if we just looked at that speech like that was said against us? I don't care what side you're on, because the volleys went both ways. What if we just looked and said, I'm just going to forgive you for that. We're told in 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 18, verse 8, that we should be forgiving one another because love covers a multitude of sins. What if we just looked at this election season and said, you know what? The elections happened. We know the results. Not all of them, but most of them. So we know the results. I'm just going to cover the junk that was said, because the people that say it probably in the inner recesses of their heart and mind, once they have a chance to settle down, they didn't mean it. They didn't mean it to that degree, because I'm finding already people are beginning to go, yeah, that was we kind of got caught up in everything else. And as a Christian, we're good at going, let's just cover that. So practice some forgiveness. There's really no way to move on until we've done that. And so let love cover the multitude of hateful and inflammatory words that were said and move on. Otherwise, you're going to be a prisoner to it always. Then I would suggest this. Colossians 4:6 says, let your conversation, your speech, your interaction with each other be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer everyone. Be gracious in what you say. I mentioned this in the message on Sunday. If your side won, don't gloat. If your side lost, don't gripe. Let's just be gracious toward each other. And to have our speech be gracious, to be filled with grace, means that what we're doing is we're speaking words in tones that impart value, strength, and encouragement to the other person. even if they've done something that maybe you go, I don't think they deserve it. Grace is an in spite of term, Steve. The grace of God on my behalf means in spite of my incessant, huge sins, God's still for me. So if our speech is going to be grace-filled, it's going to be speech that says, this is not about what you deserve. You're a human being made in the image of God with inherent dignity and power. And I want to encourage, and I want to affirm your value as a human being in what I say and how I say what I say. When our speech is seasoned with salt, it goes back to this powerful metaphor of influence that Jesus used. One, because salt adds flavor, it makes things more palatable. It means say things in a way that are easy to hear. My goodness, all right? And second, salt also heals wounds. And so attempt to say things that can heal the wounds, the divisions that have been said. I think it's so critical. Be forgiving. Let love cover a multitude of sins. Be gracious in your speech with other people. That will help healing happen. If we stop inflaming and we start settling and being conciliatory, that can go a long way. And then the third thing I would say is this, and this is based off 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 22 and 23. Find common ground. And I need to explain that. Here's what Paul said. I'm reading from the New Living Translation in this case. I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. I do everything to spread the good news and to share its blessings. Paul goes, I start by finding common ground with people. All relationships require common ground, right? People with nothing in common don't have a relationship. What if we looked at people with whom we have political differences, but we looked at them and said, they're still human. As human, they have desires and concerns and interests that I happen to share. What if I just went to the common ground and started talking with them about that? And how could we work together on something we actually agree with? We both want. Because when we find common ground, one of the things we're doing is we're asserting in a very powerful way, I'm with you. There are things we can work together on. And I think you have value in helping us work together to have good things happen. In the book of 1 Corinthians, one of the many subjects Paul deals with was the issue of a particular individual whose actions were damaging not only their testimonies of church, but they were damaging the relational fabric of the church. So much so that extreme action had to be taken. That person ended up repenting, oh man, I'm being an idiot. This is not how I should be behaving. But the Corinthian church was holding that person at arm's length. So when Paul writes the second letter to the church of Corinth, he goes, knock it off, people. I'm paraphrasing. He actually says these words. This is 2 Corinthians 9, 7, and 8, and then verse 11. He says, now, however, it is time to forgive and comfort him. Otherwise, he may be overcome by discouragement. So I urge you now to reaffirm your love for him so that Satan will not outsmart us, for we are familiar with his evil schemes. Here's what Paul is saying. Invite him back in. Start working together on stuff. Because if you don't find common ground and start working together on stuff, if you don't start to normalize your relationship, Satan will exploit that to do damage to you, him, and the church and culture in general. So there's something about going, let's hop on some common ground. Let's start normalizing our relationship by working together respectfully on something that can help us to, okay, it'll be good. We're together and go on. So if we'll let love cover a multitude of sins, if we'll be gracious in the way that we speak to each other, if we'll find common ground and work forward, I think we've taken some very powerful steps to beginning to heal from all the damage that was done by things said and actions taken during the political season. That'd be a start.
For sure. And I think it's important to understand that healing is a process and it takes time.
Good point.
It's not something that it can immediately be overcome. And I think all of what you said is so important for us to understand and for us to remember that this can only happen as we are grounded and rooted in our relationship with Jesus Christ. All of this flows from the fruit of the Spirit, right?
That's right. That's right.
Peace, love, joy, patience. Right? Patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. If we can implement some of those fruits of the Spirit into the way we approach this, it's so important for us to hold true to that.
Yeah.
So all of this is going to stem from our relationship with Christ and our surrender to His Spirit. And when we can do that, I believe we can make steps towards healing. I believe that we will, and some of that's going to come from changing the reputation of who the church is. The church is made collective church, right? I'm not talking specifically about connections, but the collective American church over the course of decades. Man, we've stuck our foot in our mouth plenty of times,
way too often,
and we've made some very damaging and decisions. And so, for us to go back and say, how do we stay rooted in what is Christ-like, and then how do we move forward in love and in patience and in kindness? These are the things that will ultimately help us change the impression. So when you say you're a Christian, they're not immediately jumping to you're a Christian nationalist or you're part of a hate group or you're X, Y, or Z.
Exactly right, Steve. Oh, so well said. Spot on.
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, Dave, I'm sure we could talk and talk and talk. I mean, it seems like it's never ending.
For sure.
But we do want to encourage you, if you have questions, like we've said multiple times, we invite those in. We actually really enjoy sitting here, debating about them, talking about them, looking through the Scripture and finding out ways that we can present to you, hopefully, God's heart in these matters. And we would love for you to continue that dialogue with us, and this is the best way. Just go to our website, my3c.org, click on Ask a Question, and it's anonymous. We have no idea who's asking these questions, but we love sitting here and talking about them and helping walk you guys through that as well. Thank you for joining us again. We hope that you can take a deep breath, keep your eyes fixated and focused on...
Maybe we should do some deep breathing exercises together, Steve.
Maybe a little yoga or something, keep us grounded. But we are so grateful that you continue to invite us into your lives through either YouTube or Facebook or however you're hearing or watching this. And just remember that we love you here at Connections, but more importantly, Jesus loves you, and we will see you again next time.